Welcome to Uncivil Society. I'm Tom Watson. This podcast explores what happens when civic institutions, community bonds, and nonprofit systems are strained or broken by forces that undermine trust, cooperation, and collective well-being. In this episode, we'll focus on the city of Minneapolis, where a federal enforcement operation has escalated into a true crisis, affecting thousands of residents, local organizations, and the very idea of community safety.
It's schools shutting down. It's businesses closing. It's people being afraid to go out and get groceries and therefore are going hungry.
This is not simply an immigration crackdown, in my view. What's happening is affecting schools, small businesses, nonprofit programs, sporting events, life on the streets, everyday life across entire neighborhoods. And the response from local nonprofits, philanthropic leaders, community networks, community organizations shows just how deeply this moment is shaking civil society. There are many stories unfolding in the world right now, from Greenland to Ukraine to the Middle East. But I'd urge the U.S. nonprofit sector, major philanthropists, and anyone involved in civil society to follow closely what is happening right now in Minneapolis, systematically and with increasing violence and cruelty within our own country.
It's their inability to get money so that they're unable to pay rent. There is a snowball effect that is happening right here, and it's not just because we're in Minnesota and there's a lot of snow. The snowball effect is because what ICE is doing is intentional. This is intentionally putting us in a very difficult position that is not pro-business and is not pro-safety. The only thing that I can see it being is pro-politics.
Let's set the scene. On January 7th, 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, a community activist, was shot and killed by an immigration and customs enforcement agent during a federal operation in South Minneapolis. A U.S. citizen and a mother of three, Renee was described by her partner as someone who believed in community and compassion. In her words, "We had whistles, they had guns." Horrifying video of the shooting raised immediate questions about whether deadly force was justified, and authorities' claims of self-defense melted in the face, video, and the facts. Unfortunately, federal authorities are not investigating the shooting, and they have handcuffed local authorities in their own investigation of this killing. In my view, the killing must be investigated, and there's no statute of limitations on murder. Mayor Jacob Frey, responding to the incident, said after viewing the video and the federal narrative, which described the shooting as justified, he called it bullshit. He said federal agents should get the fuck out of Minneapolis. Community members described the federal operation, known as Operation Metro Surge, as involving thousands of ICE and Border Patrol agents deployed throughout the Twin Cities, far outnumbering local police and disrupting everyday life on many, many streets in many, many different neighborhoods. Residents report armed agents at grocery stores, transit stations, and neighborhoods, sparking fear among immigrant families and their neighborhoods. A Minnesota immigrant interviewed by the Guardian newspaper said, "People come to this country to feel safe. Instead, many of us are now living in fear. It feels like our own country has turned against its people." Here's Jane Groutman, Executive Director of the International Institute of Minnesota, a widely respected resettlement agency that works with recent arrivals.
It's terrifying for people. And again, these are people who have left their countries because they fear for their lives. And so they've already been through just unimaginable trauma and events that are terrifying with not only the parents, but their children.
According to the NPR report, linked below, Groutman said her organization has been inundated with calls and in-person visits from distraught families. Families are calling us, she said. They're coming here. They're extremely upset. They don't understand what's going on. She said refugees are reporting no access to legal representation, no explanation of the allegations against them, and no clear process. There are now more ICE and Border Patrol agents in Minneapolis than state and local police. Residents are saying that it feels like an invasion. The impact on everyday life, meanwhile, is completely real. The presence of aggressive and often violent federal agents has had wide-ranging effects. School and children's safety has been affected. High school journalist Lila Dominguez wrote about ICE agents appearing on school campuses, leading to canceled classes and heightened anxiety. She said, "My hands were really shaky as she watched the agents arrive," a stark indicator of how enforcement is touching students' lives in a place where they should feel safe. Immigrant-owned businesses report sharp drops in customers and revenue as community members avoid public spaces for fear of detention. One shop owner said the crackdown has left many afraid to even walk down busy streets. Meanwhile, residents are organizing whistle patrols near schools to alert neighbors when ICE vehicles are present, a grassroots effort not seen in normal civic life. I will include these links in the show notes below. It's interesting to watch the organizing happening on the streets of Minneapolis, where many protesters have been using whistles to let people know about ICE presence. You see the ICE presence, these guys are wearing masks, they're heavily armed, they are not necessarily wearing badges, no personal identification. They are not driving government vehicles or driving rental cars recklessly. They operate in packs, and they're scaring the living crap out of everyday residents. It is interesting. One more recent tactic, which allows people to stay in their homes and still participate in the warning signals, is that people are using the key fobs for their cars to set off their car alarms in unison when an ICE patrol or gang approaches the street. Interesting. Meanwhile, the nonprofit community and its leaders are starting to take action. Local nonprofit networks and philanthropic leaders have been vocal about the impact on human dignity and civil society. The Minneapolis Council of Nonprofits and the Minnesota Council on Foundations issued a joint statement affirming support for immigrant, refugee, and asylum-seeking community members across the state. Here's a quote. "Across our state, immigrants are living in terror of intensifying ICE raids. These targeted raids are disrupting the lives of citizens and residents who have spent decades building Minnesota's economy and culture." Council of Nonprofits also issued a statement after the Good murder. Amidst this tragedy in South Minneapolis, our state is also undergoing what the Federal Department of Homeland Security has called the largest scale immigration operation ever. An onslaught that is blatantly instigating and escalating harm, is endangering our friends and neighborhoods, breaking up families, and traumatizing our children. They added, "As we collectively hold grief for the life that was lost," in Renee Good's case, but for the lives already lost in this fight, and we know that many have died in ICE custody, and for the people so profoundly impacted, let's also recognize the strength, resiliency, and resolve of Minnesotans. Our love for our state and for each other is evidenced by the good community-based work of our nonprofits. Thank you all for what you do today and every day. Legal advocacy groups like the Immigration Law Center of Minnesota, and personal note here, or professional note, I have worked with many legal aid, legal services, and legal reform organizations during my consulting career, and I completely understand where the Immigrant Law Center is coming from. And they have rightly raised concerns about targeted enforcement against immigrant communities and the chilling effect on families there. Here's a quote from them. "As immigration lawyers and advocates, we recognize this pattern of state violence perpetrated by government agencies. Over the past year, this has occurred in California, Illinois, Oregon, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. Full-scale invasion of communities across the country represents a brash form of authoritarian fascism. The federal government has shown a willingness to completely disregard the law, tramples people's legal rights, avoid accountability, and destroy anyone who stands in their way." Now remember, these are nonprofit organizations based in the community. These are the sort of community firmament organizations. They are not radical activists. This is part of the establishment. And for them to speak this strongly shows a degree of terror that is running through the communities that they serve. The sector's reaction to this shows that it's not just about isolated incidents, but about sustaining community cohesion, the ability to counter fear with support and ensure that families and neighborhoods retain access to rights, resources, and dignity. I would make this request. of nonprofit leaders, major voices in philanthropy and civil society, and other social sector leaders who may be tuning into this podcast. Please don't turn away. Please don't think this is a local issue limited to Minneapolis. Raise up your voices and make special emergency grants if you have the opportunity to do so. Show solidarity with your statements. Over this past year, I've heard, I think, too many nonprofit and social sector leaders express the idea that now is the time to lay low so the storm can pass you by. It's not going to. Only a united front of the majority, and that majority believes in community values and action for the common good in this country, still to this day. Only that majority can roll back this authoritarian wave. A couple of shout outs here. Here's a quote from John Palfrey of the MacArthur Foundation, who is always willing to use his major platform to signal leadership from big ticket philanthropy. We join our friends in Minnesota in denouncing these actions that endanger our communities. In this painful moment, we continue our work to protect the health and well-being of our communities and our country. And it was great to read what Don Chen and his colleagues from the Surdna Foundation posted. A really lengthy and detailed statement, but I'll give you just a little taste of it, centered around the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King. As leaders of one of the nation's oldest family foundations, we stand with those who are standing up for injustice and call on all neighbors to work together to build Dr. King's vision of a beloved community. Conditions may get worse before they start to get better. Aside, I do think that's true, and it's going to be more widespread throughout the country. But we remain hopeful that bright spots will continue to appear. As Dr. King once noted, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. We see stars in Minnesota in every act of solidarity, every neighbor supported, every stand for dignity. Let's support their efforts so that light can prevail. As the Trump administration prepares to send federal paratroopers into Minnesota in a clear escalation of this horrendous crisis that they themselves created, we should also listen to officials on the ground, elected and appointed officials who so often work across partisan lines on a local basis and work with nonprofit organizations and community groups. This is the patchwork of civil society. They've been blunt. Minnesota City Council member Jason Chavez called ICE's actions unwelcome, unsafe, and disgusting, adding that they were tearing families apart and separating loved ones without clear justification. Minnesota State Representative Mike Howard said, quote, "Our communities in the metro suburbs and throughout the state are under siege from a federal government that is increasingly brutalizing our citizens and immigrants alike." And Mayor Frey, who called the surge of federal agents an occupying force that has quite literally invaded our city. You can go through whatever rhetorical flourish you want, but when you have 3,000 ICE agents and Border Patrol come to the city, when you've got a supposed threat of 1,500 military personnel coming to the city, yeah, that's very much what it feels like. To me, these responses reflect a broad consensus among community, political, and nonprofit leaders in Minnesota. The federal presence is creating disruption that goes beyond policy to affect the social fabric of the city itself. This matters a lot beyond Minneapolis, and that's why we should all be paying attention. While some may see this as a localized conflict between the federal enforcement and municipal authorities, I think the implications are much broader. When federal operations justified in the name of enforcement instead cause community fear, economic instability, trauma and distrust, and indeed injury and death, the structures that nonprofits and civil society institutions rely on are weakened. When people are afraid to leave their homes, when schools adapt to threats rather than learning, in some cases closing, and when businesses shut down because patrons are too scared to shop, the basic networks of trust and cooperation that define civil society erode. Those of us who work in the nonprofit sector should also remember that the pretext, yes, it is just a pretext, for the federal invasion of Minneapolis is a scandal involving the misuse of funds by a nonprofit organization. A case that was uncovered by the Biden administration Justice Department because it involved federal COVID funds and is being pursued by the Minnesota Attorney General. It has nothing whatsoever to do, nothing, with the bands of armed, masked agents in the streets attacking Minnesotans. And clearly, this is a pretext model that can happen anywhere. In Minnesota, nonprofits, foundations, community advocates, and civic leaders have stepped forward to provide support, unity, and practical resources. They are filling gaps where fear and disruption have emerged. Their work is urgent, meaningful, and grounded in decades of community building. They understand what is going on the ground. But their ability to sustain that work and to contribute to a functioning civil society depends not just on resources, but on the capacity to operate in an environment that sees people as contributors and not threats. In closing, I have to say that the crisis in Minneapolis is a stark example of what happens when civic life is destabilized and nonprofits are thrust into roles that they are not designed to fulfill. Not just service delivery, but community defense and resilience under pressure. This is a moment for reflection, for solidarity, and for recognition of the essential role that our nonprofits and community organizations play in maintaining civic stability and human dignity. Thank you for tuning in to Uncivil Society. Your support means everything, so please take a moment and like this podcast and subscribe to future episodes. As we move forward with this new program, we'll continue to explore how civil society is tested, how communities respond, and how organizations and people rise to meet these challenges in cities across the country and indeed around the world.